Hey, shalom, 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 lakam, which is peace unto you all. Hayawam tawab la atham, za achyakam yawam on Chagadol, Charlotte, which is good day. This is your brother Yawam from the GMS camp in Charlotte. Nachamatam, kaya, hamalakath hashamayim kwara, repent ye for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Call layim la la, but now Yahweh bahasham Yahweh shai, bahasham rcha hakodash, wa masana la zakonim nawa. Wamalakim Shor Chagadol, which is all praises to our Father Yahweh, which means He exists. Bahasham, and the name Yahweh Shai delivers in double honors to the elders and apostles of Great Millstone. This is Mark chapter 8, and we'll get verse 23. And it says, and he took the blind man. I'm going to start at, verse 17. And it says, and when Yahweh Shai knew it, he saith unto them, why reason ye? Because ye have no bread. Perceive ye not yet, neither understand. Have ye your heart yet hardened? Having eyes, see ye not, and having ears, hear ye not, and do ye not remember? When I break 5 loaves among 5,000, how among baskets full of fragments took ye up? They say unto him 12. And when the 7 among 4,000, how many baskets full of fragments took ye up? And they said 7. And he said unto them, how is it that ye do not understand? And he cometh to Bethsaida, and they bring a blind man unto him, and besought him to touch him. And he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the town. And when he had spit on his eyes and put his hands upon him, he asked him if he saw aught. And he looked up and said, I see men as trees walking. After that, he put his hands again upon his eyes and made him look up, and he was restored and saw every man clearly, And ultimately, that's twofold, you see, because that goes into a similitude, all right? It says, verse 24, and he looked up and said, I see men as trees walking, so our men are actually likened unto trees, all right? And that specific example is in the scripture, you see, because in the Hebrew language, all right, it's also men that is, in the Hebrew language, men are ultimately likened unto trees, and how it's made up in that, in the specific way. And I just want to touch on that. So I'm going to get the word for tree. All right, and this is the word for tree, and it says aitaza. It says tree, wood, timber, stock, plank, stalk, stick, gallows, tree, trees, wood, pieces of wood, fire, cedar wood, woody flax. All right. And it says wood, especially of a wooden post, stake, gibbet. All right. And then it says a tree. All right. But it says aitaza, and we understand in the Hebrew language, everything is made up from, what it does, all right, in creation, So when we say aitaza, first you got the I. All right. So let's get that word that is that corresponds with I. All right. This is the word for I, which it will go into ayan. All right, and with the eye, it says eye, a physical eye, as showing mental qualities of mental and spiritual faculties. It says, by analogy, a fountain, it says affliction, outward appearance. All right, then it says resemblance. All right, so that word in aitaza will go into ayan, which you can use ayan, you use your eyes to see resemblances. All right, then you got taza, which taza goes into righteous. All right, that word for taza goes into tazadak, which ultimately goes into righteousness, or it goes into righteous. All right. So I'm going to go to that real fast. tazadak. All right. And it says to be just, be righteous. It says to have a just cause, be in the right. All right. In which ultimately that word for tazadak, goes into or tazadayak goes into righteous as the adjective of a righteous man. So trees ultimately resemble men. All right. Right here it says resembles the righteous. All right. And trees have various different ways in how they resemble men, more specifically the righteous man. All right, so let's get a couple precepts and we're gonna read this again. Mark chapter 8. Excuse me. Mark chapter 8, and we'll get verse 24 again. And it says, and he looked up and said, I see men as trees walking. All right, so trees ultimately are likened unto men in the scriptures and vice versa. All right, so let's get some information real fast. So it says trees are often compared to the human spine. All right, and if you notice right here, they got a picture because the spine looks just like that. And it's so much so to where, the human spine also shares the letters that are likened unto or pretty much the same letters as the tree. But we're continuing on, it says trees are often compared to the human spine, acting as a central upright pillar of life that provides structural support, flexibility, and a conduit for energy. And that's really how the righteous is supposed to be. It's just that, we sinned and we went off, so we're in these chains of darkness, but we're supposed to be a reflection of the Lord, Yahweh Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, in being upright, a pillar of life, because it's the law, statutes, and commandments that ultimately push forth life. All right, in which we're going to get that in the kingdom, but it starts on this side with this truth, It says upright pillar of life that provides structural support, flexibility, and a conduit for energy. Much like a spine, tree trunks are durable central conduits that endure stress, allowing the organism to grow, bend, and survive despite environmental pressures. All right. It says, I'll read a little bit more of this. It says the trunk, it says support and structure. The trunk represents the spine, the central bone or trunk that sustains the entire structure. Flexibility, and notice that trees are always connected to a source. All right, so let's get this real fast. This is Psalms chapter 1, and we'll get verse 1, and it says the righteous and the wicked contrasted. It says blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly. And going back to the scripture right here, Mark chapter 8 and verse 24. It says, and he looked up and said, I see men as trees walking. Men do actually walk as trees. All right. And trees, trees actually walk, which is it's spiritual. All right. And it also goes into it's spiritual, but I don't want to, we get to it, but I'm gonna get this real fast. This is Psalms chapter 1 and verse 1. It says, blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful, because if you took a tree and you put it into you take it from that the things that's going to be beneficial for it, i.e. From water, from a source of energy. If you take it from getting all of that and you put it into a destructive environment, all right, hence, for us, it'll be destructive for us to walk in the counsel of the ungodly. It will be destructive for us to stand in the way of sinners, all right, and it will also be destructive for us, to sit in the seat of the scornful, all right. But it says verse 2, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doeth he meditate day and night, so true stability, all right, because a tree that is connected to a source, all right, and our source is the Lord, Yahweh Shai, ultimately we have true sustenance, true stability, and true structural support, all right. Verse 3, it says, and he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water that bringeth forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper. All right, and trees that's by that source of water, ultimately those be the best trees. They got the fruit. They got all their leaves. They flourishing. They got the root, or excuse me, they got the water going from the roots all the way up into the leaves. So it shows a tree that's ultimately in a good condition. All right, but then when you got the trees that's not near water, all right, they aren't sucking any type of nutrients. And those trees wither away. All right, in which again, that tree of or that source of water, all right, is the Lord Yahweh Shai. Hence, John the fourth chapter. Those that ultimately subscribe to the Lord, ultimately are not going to thirst again. It's going to be a continual nourishment. All right, and scriptures like Job, 23 and 12, come to mind. You see, because we have more than what we need. Or we have more than enough. Pretty much is the point that I'm trying to illustrate. In the spirit. But nevertheless, continuing on. All right, it says, let's go back to this. It says, trees like the spine are designed to bend under stress, wind, snow without breaking, similar to how a flexible spine supports the body. It says conduit for life. Just as the spine protects the spinal cord, the trunk serves as a central hub for transport of nutrients and water to the branches. In which that shows that we got to stay connected to the source. All right, that rock, all right, mentioned in Matthew, the 7th chapter. But it says, as the twig is bent, the proverb is often used in chiropractic, likening a tree's growth to the development of the human spinal column, suggesting that the early care determines long-term structural health. All right, going back to that stability, being constantly delighted, all right, in the law, that day and night in Psalms 1 and verse 2. That shows something that's going to truthfully grow. All right. So it says metaphorical connections. It says healing and grounding. Leaning against a tree is often viewed as a sign to align and or find a calm, solid presence, with the tree acting as a wise grounding force for one's own posture and mental state. It says the tree of life. Many cultures and individuals view the spine as a personal tree of life, representing vitality, strength, and structural integrity. It says in a therapeutic or metaphorical sense, nurturing the flexibility and strength of our internal tree, the spine, is crucial for our well-being. But pretty much the point that I wanted to get was, not the metaphorical connections, but these going down to here. All right. And then also I want to get this right here. Or actually, let me get this. All right, it says Itazah. It says I and then Tazah are the two letters that's inside that word. But it says the upright and firmness of the tree. It says a tree, a woody perennial plant with a supporting stem or trunk and multiple branches. The upright and firmness of the tree. The elders of the tribe were the upright and firm ones, making decisions and giving advice. It says Itazah, when you add a ha, advice given in the sense of being the firm support of the community. All right, then you got Itazah with the ha added. It says the elders of the tribe were the upright and firm ones, like trees, making decisions and giving advice. All right. And all of these have a relation, you see, because righteous men, are the ones that ultimately take counsel, and trees take counsel as well. All right, so let's get that, let's get that point. It says trees that can walk up to 20 meters per year. It says, skipping down, it says, as the soil erodes, the tree grows new long roots that find new and more solid ground, sometimes up to 20 meters. So pretty much what happens is the tree might not be able to, get nourishment in a particular area. So what they'll do is it'll grow roots, all right, and it'll move the tree to where it'll gain nourishment in another spot. So that's why the scripture said, I see men as trees walking, because trees actually do walk or traverse. All right, they can travel to get more sunlight. That's why sometimes you'll see a tree, it'll lean towards that light, to grow. Or you might see a grass or a plant, it'll lean towards, or it'll lean towards the sun, to gain, that light, for what they call photosynthesis. All right. But it says, said Varansky, then slowly as the roots settle in the new soil and the trees bend patiently towards the new roots, the old roots slowly lift into the air. The whole process for the tree to relocate to a new place with better sunlight and more solid ground can take a couple years, so they traverse. All right. And they also, they'll communicate. All right. They use the mushrooms. They got a whole system. It's called, they call it the, instead of calling it the Internet of Things, they call it the, I can't remember what the word of it, or the, what it's called. it's a network of roots and like the mushrooms, they pretty much communicate through different chemicals. If a tree is dying off, it'll send chemicals to other trees. That way, they pretty much understand to either to protect themselves from predators, or to make themselves into a more advantageous position. But pretty much the point is that that scripture, all right, shows how trees ultimately are likened unto men in the scriptures. All right, let's get this. This is Hosea chapter 12, and we'll get verse 10. And it says, I have also spoken by the prophets, and I have multiplied visions and used similitudes by the ministry of the prophets. All right, so the Lord takes a picture, he takes an illustration of one thing, all right, and he paints it to relay a certain message. All right, so just as trees, they move to they move to the true nourishment. All right, so that's how the righteous men are doing in these times. All right, we're seeking the Lord Yahweh Bahasham Yahweh Shai, and in doing that, ultimately, going back to the scripture, Psalms 1 and verse 3, it says, and he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water that bringeth forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper. All right, and ultimately, where we going to prosper as in the kingdom. So that this brings me to my next precept. This is Psalms chapter 92, and we'll get verse 12. All right, and it says, the righteous shall flourish like the palm tree. He shall grow like a cedar in Lebanon. And a cedar in Lebanon, the cedars are known to be very tall. So in the kingdom, we're going to have that stature back. We're going to be renowned. All right. It says, he shall grow like a cedar in Lebanon. Those that be planted in the house of the Lord shall flourish in the courts of our power. They shall still bring forth fruit in old age. They shall be fat and flourishing. All right. So ultimately, we're gonna be fat and flourishing. We're gonna have abundance. All right. Second Esdras 6 and verse 52, or 8 and verse 52. I'm gonna get that real fast. Second Esdras chapter 8, and we'll get verse 52. All right, and it says, for unto you is paradise open, the tree of life is planted, the time to come is prepared, plenteousness is made ready, a city is builded, and rest is allowed, yet perfect goodness and wisdom. So we're going to have abundance, we're going to have plenteousness. On this side, as for, Jake, for the most part, all right, Jake, for the most part on this side, due to the curses, all right, ultimately, Jake is in a destitute type of a state. All right, in the kingdom, from the elect, ultimately, are going to have abundance, you see. But then 2/3, when they born back into the kingdom, all right, ultimately they're going to have abundance as well, because we're going to be a nation of kings and priests. All right. So nevertheless, let's also we'll get Leviticus chapter 3, and we'll get verse 9. And it says, and he shall offer of the sacrifice of the peace offering, an offering made by fire unto the Lord, the fat thereof and the whole rump, it shall he take off by the backbone, and the fat that covereth the inwards, and all the fat that is upon the inwards. And the reason why I wanted to get this, because the word for backbone is right here. All right, and it says Aitazah, all right, because the backbone is likened unto a tree. All right, because what keeps the tree upright, all right, is what keeps the tree upright is pretty much, the vibration it has in its Hebrew name. All right, Aitazah resemble the righteous. All right, and the righteous, the similitude there. All right, the righteous ultimately have a spine, and what ultimately provides for nutrients in the body goes into the spine. All right, the spine. When you look at the trees, all right, the trees have that. They have a proverbial vine, all right, given that water, and it spreads forth to the rest of the tree. Our spine, pretty much, we got nerves coming from our spine, all right, and it does a couple things, but it allows for nutrients and stuff like that to be traversed throughout the body. That's another similitude, But it says spine, backbone, os sacrum. It says either spine, os sacrum, bone close to fat tail. It says the spine as giving firmness to the body. So trees are known for their firmness. All right, and trees also can traverse, via lack of resources in a particular area. But pretty much the point I wanted to go into in this lesson was how trees are likened unto the righteous. So Adonai Tazah Zabana Yapa. Lord's will, that was a beautiful edification through the Spirit. Wadawar Tazah Atam Yashya Wam Tawab. Lord's will, you all have a good day. Wa Shalom Lakam, which is peace unto you all. Shalom, shalom.